Hi, welcome back to our study of progressivism. And in this section, we're going to be talking about Chapter 9, Section 4, Taft and his progressive policies. So in the last few sections, we learned a little bit about Teddy Roosevelt. Roosevelt became president when McKinley was shot. He fulfilled that term, and then he ran for election for his first time in 1904, was elected, and served those 8 years. And at the end of that those 4 years, at the end of that term, Roosevelt had made it very clear from the beginning that he did not want reelected. He wanted to move on and do something else. So at the end of that term, he calls in his Secretary of State, Howard Taft, and basically asks him, what do you want? Do you want the presidency, or do you want to become Supreme Court judge? And Mr. Taft says he wanted to become Supreme Court judge. He was a professor at Yale in law for several years, and that was his desire, passion, that was his love. Mrs. Taft, who was at the dinner, said the presidency, and so Mr. Taft becomes president with the promise and the backing by Teddy Roosevelt, the American public. It was a no-brainer. They selected Taft in that 1908 election. Taft, as president, never felt comfortable. You can see a quote here. It says, "When I'm addressed as Mr. President, I turn to see whether or not you're at my elbow," meaning Teddy Roosevelt. Good morning, Mr. President. Taft is looking around to see if Roosevelt's standing behind him. Taft just never felt really comfortable, called it the lonesomest place in the world, the office of president. He just never really enjoyed his time, his term there. He did the job that he was supposed to do, or that what he swore to do, but he just never really cared for it too much. Instead of promoting and moving forward with progressive issues, Taft instead consolidated, or he kind of stood still on where they were. There was no moving forward. And in some cases, we're going to look at two in particular, in some cases, Taft actually moved the Progressive Party back to old Republican ways. Again, depending on how you feel about progressives, progressives think that government should be heavily involved in people's lives, heavy regulation, and so maybe pulling back is maybe not that bad of an idea. First, in regards to tariffs, there were two tariff bills. Taft ran on a platform of low tariffs. So the Payne tariff, which was coming through the House of Representatives, would continue with that policy. But the Senate had a second version, and that was the Aldrich tariff. So the two are passed together. That's why it's called the Payne-Aldrich tariff. And the Aldrich actually did more negative in the eyes of progressives than the Payne tariff did. Aldrich increased tariffs and increased spending. Aldrich did, I think I said that. And progressives didn't like it at all. Republicans liked it, but progressives did not. So with Taft's support of that, he is seen as going against progressive ways. The second issue, Teddy Roosevelt was a huge conservationist, and when he set aside millions of acres of land for conservation and established the National Park Service, people loved that. Well, Taft appointed a man as his Secretary of the Interior who was not that like-minded. Actually, the guy who he appointed believed that government should not be controlling the land, that it should be open for public use. So in one move, this Secretary of the Interior removed 1 million acres from the protected list and made it open to the public. Progressives claimed that he was only doing it for commercial interests, meaning that the lumber companies were paying him off to do so. And again, Taft supported that. So the tariff and the land removal, people criticized Taft for those two items, claiming that he was moving away from progressive agenda and that he had no control over his party. As a result, the Republican Party splits. Joe Cannon becomes Taft's biggest opponent, biggest outspoken person against Taft. Cannon considered himself a progressive. He was so loud that even the Republicans wanted him gone, and even some progressives wanted him gone. So progressives begin working with Democrats to eliminate Taft and get somebody back into the office who was going to be progressive and move forward with what Roosevelt had started. Roosevelt himself came out of retirement, stood up, and had several public speaking engagements where he spoke against Taft and said he had no idea what he was doing. We've mentioned before Taft's foreign policy, completely different than Roosevelt's foreign policy. Roosevelt was one of using military strength, speak softly and carry a big stick. Tell your opposition, tell your foreign relations what you plan to do. Let them have a chance to accept that privately, and then when they don't, you use your military force to make them, basically. Taft was more dollars for bullets. Let's pay our way out. So in just about everything, Taft opposed the progressive agenda. He claimed to be a progressive, but he really wasn't. And that just goes back to his lack of desire to be president. He appointed people surrounding him, his advisors surrounding him, who he thought would give him the best advice. And he went with it. Whether it was the best advice or not, he always went with it. Back to Roosevelt real quick. After his many speaking engagements, a reporter asked him, do you think you're healthy enough to run for president for a second term or a third term, I guess? And his quote was, I'm as healthy as a bull moose, or I'm as strong as a bull moose. And that's when Roosevelt does decide to run against Taft in 1912. He runs with the Progressive Party, but it becomes known in the newspapers as the Bull Moose Party, referring to Roosevelt's bull moose statement. Gifford Pinchot, I just show you this picture here. This guy was appointed by Roosevelt to kind of head up the National Forest Service agencies, and he was a staunch opponent to what Taft was doing with the Forest Service and removing that 1 million acres from private use, from conservation use. All right, 1912 election, Democrats have a candidate, Woodrow Wilson, and the Republicans have Taft, and then progressives have Roosevelt. Even though Taft claimed to be a progressive, he still ran as a Republican because Roosevelt's running as a progressive. Well, the Progressives Party is essentially the Republican Party. So when Roosevelt jumps in, there's already a split in the Republican Party. So when Roosevelt jumps in, the progressives throw their vote to Roosevelt. The Republicans, who like the old conservative ways, throw their support to Taft. And so anytime you have a split party in an election, that party is going to lose. And the Democrats win. It's the first Democratic win in 17 years. Wilson comes in, and he's much more progressive than Taft. Not so much more than Roosevelt, but he's still more progressive than Taft. Wilson does not believe that there's no such thing as a good trust. All trust should be broken up, and he breaks up as many trusts as Taft did. Now, that's one thing that Taft did that was progressive. Taft had 90 different trusts broken up compared to Roosevelt's 44, and then Wilson also has more trusts broken up than Taft does. Democrats think they're getting a good one, and I guess they do kind of get somebody they want. However, like I said before, Wilson is almost as progressive as Roosevelt. He brings in antitrust laws, as I just mentioned, banking reform, and a reduction in tariff. All three of those are progressive reforms. So we have a Democrat running or operating as a progressive. Wilson's foreign policy, since I mentioned the other two, Wilson's foreign policy is known as missionary diplomacy, meaning sit down and work out your issues at the table to avoid bloodshed and wasting of money, and that doesn't work real well. The big issue, the first main issue he faced was a situation down in Mexico where several Mexican leaders were being assassinated, and due to its location on the American border, American troops were sent in after some American miners were shot and killed by Pancho Villa. Wilson sends in 15,000 American troops led by General John J. Pershing, one of our own from Missouri. They can never find Pancho Villa, and Wilson calls those soldiers home because of an impending battle, or an impending war, I should say, in Europe. Wilson is our president as we enter World War I, which is a unit which we'll be getting into pretty soon. So that's one big piece of fame that Wilson's known for, being president for the United States during World War I. Also, President Wilson was acting president when women got the right to vote with the 19th Amendment. So a couple of big issues for Wilson during his term which make him memorable. Okay, thanks a lot, guys, and I'll see you in class.